I want to organize some thoughts in a video and just maybe call it Corona Thoughts or something like that, or maybe something more clickbaity. I'll figure it out. But one of the first thoughts that I has, one of my cat meme that I've had is racism. I think calling the virus the China virus it's just not cool. It is not fucking cool. Um, what we need to do is is not point fingers at people. We can't say, "Oh, this is the China virus. It's because Chinese people are dirty." That's just not fucking cool, you know? Um, it doesn't really matter where the virus comes from, you know? And labeling it something like that, as someone that's like half Asian, I think it's just extremely offensive and wrong, and I don't want that sentiment to be carried around, you know. I don't want racism to be perpetuated globally. Um, and the branding of a virus, like, yeah, like it came from like China, you know, like it came from Wuhan, China, or whatever. Like, it's just important to take note of that. And so, kind of dismantling that notion that like, oh, like it's because of this, that, you know, it's because of Chinese people and that they're dirty and all that random shit, kind of just maybe we can call it asshole thinking, that it's just not cool. And we don't want to be asshole thinkers. We want to be just nice people. And so that's one of the first thoughts. Um, and thinking about how information is being spread and calling it something like, you know, the China virus or whatever, like, I think that kind of leads into information suppression. And I think that's one thing that was a critical failure in this, is just the suppression of information. And I think that's something that, you know, China did poorly, which was try to cover it up like it wasn't something that, you know, was going to spread elsewhere. And I think that was another just big failure, and spreading poor, like, bad information, like, oh, like the heat's going to kill the virus, which comes from Trump, obviously, you know, the the fucking demon king of shitty information. um Anyways, so the opposite of information suppression needs to occur, which is, you know, delivering good information and spreading it quickly. Which kind of leads into underpreparedness, and I think we were very, very underprepared for a pandemic of this scale. And we are in a global society. There's like super fast trains. Like in Japan, there are planes flying around everywhere, or there were. And obviously, everything has slowed down. But when things come back to pace, like, it's just super important to think about being prepared and having adequate testing, and having a sort of, well, Bill Gates suggests like a military task force that can help deal with um, you know, like testing and the delivering of like medication and whatnot. And I think that, you know, just having proper resource management, like we have the money that, like, especially in the United States, to fund a task force like that. um and, you know, like, this was the invisible killer, and it still is. It's not like some sort of threat that's like, you know, it's not like we went to war or something. It's just this force that spread just by virtue of us existing, you know? And so we need to have resources allocated to fighting this, for the next pandemic, and they should just be ready to go if something like this happens. And that will, you know, minimize death. That will help, you know, create a safer and more peaceful world. It's just by allocating enough resources to deal with this, and having enough tests ready to go, and spreading information. Stuff like that is very important. And the next thing I want to talk about is fear. And I just don't want to see a culture that is just scared out of their fucking minds all the time. And I think it'll take a long time for us to come back from this. But it technically was coronavirus. COVID-19 is just a strain of flu. It's not some like toxic like biochemical weapon or something like that. It is just the flu. And just walking around, going on hikes, going to the grocery store, and seeing people that are just, their minds are just completely it's already infected their minds. Like, there's this quote from this book, Dune. Fear is the mind killer. And I kind of been seeing that and thinking about that quote. People being consumed by fear. People just thinking that this is like the end of the world. It's not. It totally sucks. Like, there's a whole bunch of people that have died and people that will continue to pass away, unfortunately. But we shouldn't live in fear, I think. We should be stronger than that. We have to be brave and yeah, do what's necessary. Like, washing your hands still matters. Social distancing, it still matters. Wearing a mask, that's something that we will have to be doing. That's going to be the new norm for a while. But, I can kind of smell the fear in people's eyes walking around, and it's just not fun. I think a lot of this is a mentality thing. Like, we want to be able to just stay positive, and it is difficult. It's not easy to separate from this virus, but it's not, it's not the worst thing ever. It is. I mean, for some people, maybe it is the worst thing ever, but it could be something that's even more scary. You know what I mean? And I guess the last point that I wanted to make was just talking about climate change. I think that this whole pandemic thing should be looked at as like a metaphor for climate change, because with rising greenhouse gases, increased carbon emissions, these things have kind of been put on a pause for a little bit. We will see big shifts in the world, and we need to think about climate change. We really, really do. If ocean levels rise to a certain point, and things like this have been happening, like flooding in Venice and stuff like that, and the melting of, icebergs and so on, like ocean levels rising and on all that, like it will create like something similar to this, which is just a total deflation of what society should be doing, which is functioning and moving smoothly, and people being happy and people being productive. And we have to think about ways to cut carbon emissions, because if climate change continues to move in the way that it has been, like if there has been, I think I read in a book, like there's this analogy that they gave, which was like in the Syrian refugee crisis, like there was about 1 million displaced people, but if climate change continues to happen, at some point, like there could be 100 million displaced people, which would be even worse than the pandemic, even worse than COVID, because people being displaced puts a lot of pressure on surrounding countries, and it can totally just create chaos and the collapse of economies. And we have to be able to deal with climate change, and some of those things might be a greener economy, things like solar, wind, energy that's sustainable, and energy that, you know, like not fracking and not drilling into the ground for oil. Like, um, I don't know what that entails. There's obviously solutions out there, but we really don't want to be chugging down like carbon and and like, you know, and pooping it out or something. I don't know what I'm trying to say. But like we can't be a fossil fuel economy anymore. Like that has to change. And the way that cars run, the way that, you know, we move around, like we need to think greener. And um I think those are just good questions to just kind of leave and remind people of is how do we be greener? What can I do? And I think some of that's like um, eating less meat. Because cows produce a lot of methane gas, and they take just a whole lot of resources to feed. Um, you know, maybe that means buying an electric car if you have that kind of money. Sustainability, all these sorts of things. So I do think that this pandemic is, like, I want to say, like a metaphor for climate change because the pressure of increased carbon in the atmosphere and other greenhouse gases will create situations like this where, you know, cities that exist will not exist anymore because the ocean will rise and and I think that's just a really scary thing to think about, but we shouldn't feel powerless. The time to act like is now about that. And, you know, kids growing up will remember the shittiness of this pandemic, how they didn't like go to school for like half the school year. Like that just totally sucks. But I hope that that sort of pain um and not just kids but people that have lost family members, people that, you know, it really just does suck. Job loss, all this stuff, like we really need to think about the future and think about like what we can do to make things easier because we don't want the world to stop. You know what I mean? This totally sucks. We want things to keep going, but we also need to slow down and rethink things. I think, like, especially like how our economies run and thinking about capitalism and, unfair wages and all sorts of things that create a lot of pressure on people, a lot of like depression and mental illness based on how society is run. We are coming into an age where it's like we really need to work together and not apart. And I think it's just really important to do what we can. And as an artist, like, yeah, like I want people to heal and and get and and to be the best version of themselves. Like maybe that's something that I can do. Um, but in terms of like in terms of how society functions and things that are allowing us to keep the choo-choo train churning and going, like um, there is I'm trying to think of this freaking word, but industry, yeah, like people that are in industry and medicine and all this sorts of stuff. Like, I think the time for like mass competition and trying to like, be better than everyone and make more money, like that mentality really needs to change. It's not about money anymore. It's about well-being and yeah, it's like important, but capitalism, it literally kills, it creates a lot of disparities um and we want to live in a peaceful world and I think it's going to be important to think about, especially with climate change in the next 50, 100 years, and for the next generations. Like, so this whole corona thing, it's going to pass, but we really need to start thinking about things. And hopefully this wasn't too off the hook, if that's even the right idiom to use or whatever. I hope this wasn't like too far out, dude. But just some honey for your tea, some stimulation to get some thoughts flowing, and yeah. So if you like this video, even though it's sort of like me, a disorganized mess, you can give it a thumbs up, or you can comment or subscribe, or post some questions. If you have any other video ideas, let me know. And yeah, Sarah Seagreen signing off. Alright, honey, goodbye.